So for those of you who missed it, Blood of Dawnwalker just got a massive gameplay reveal. The upcoming vampire dark fantasy RPG from a team of former CD Projekt Red developers had its first showcase last night. And for the most part, the presentation looked quite promising. Despite some flaws here and there, due to this being a pre-beta build, there are quite some big highlights to go over. Namely, there's quite a bit of player agency when it comes to completing quests, depending if it's during the day versus during the night, the duality of the human and the vampire combat system, the overall setting in the fictional 14th century kingdom of Valley Sangora, all of which looked pretty interesting. But fans were also quick to point out some issues needed to be addressed ahead of the 2026 release date, including camera positioning being somewhat awkward, graphics needing more polish, and a few other concerns regarding combat stiffness. All of which to me looks fixable, so today we're taking a look at the major features here and also some of my own feedback after seeing the gameplay reveal. Now, one of the things that impressed me personally was how you can seemingly have quite a lot of agency when it comes to approaching missions, such as how you interact with places depends if it's during the day or during the night, or if you previously decided to get involved helping somebody or ignoring them altogether, all of which can have a big impact on how future missions even unfold. It seems it's even possible to completely abandon some of these objectives and kinda rush to the main objective of saving your own family. Although the key here is that while that is not completely impossible, it would be highly difficult at low level and with absolutely no help. As somebody who enjoys exploring the other side of my decisions in these types of games, this is right up my alley to encourage replayability and subsequent playthroughs. And one such scene involved investigating a cathedral in one of these main towns of Valley Sangora. During the day, Cohen was free to roam inside and even speak to the NPCs to gather more information. However, some of the higher up scaffolding was not accessible in the current human form. So this is where switching to nighttime really helped, as now he had access to a whole new set of vampire abilities, including one called the Shadow Step that opened up exploration on the upper side, thus helping reveal more about the vampire's plans. However, at the same time, the place was now heavily guarded by Xanthi, the boss lady that we saw from the trailers, and some of her powered up goons. Now, from the presentation, it seems that choosing to engage now wasn't the only option, as at this stage she was much more difficult but not impossible to defeat. Instead, it seems that players also had the option to wait around and, for example, only attack when her guards were no longer in the area, or even choose to stick to investigation for now to later on try to reason with her. And from what they've mentioned towards the end of the presentation, it seems it's totally possible to even turn some of these vampire lords, including Xanthi over here, into your own allies via their own specific quest lines, which actually sounds really interesting, giving you all of these ways to actually approach how you want to progress into the main narrative. However, a key highlight over here from the game's premise is that you have an actual limited amount of time to save your own family, and while that raised concerns, and rightfully so with a lot of fans, it seems that it's not quite as limited as we initially thought. So this gameplay presentation, for example, is supposedly around mid-game, yet the indicator was showing that there are still 22 out of the 30 days still left to save Cohen's family. Furthermore, they mentioned in the past that only completing quests, tasks, and story progression will advance the days forward. Meanwhile, exploration and even the day and night cycle do not, as that's more of a way that affects how you interact with the open world. So instead of looking at it as some kind of stopwatch, it's more like a narrative resource, a calendar of sorts to try to push you towards the story progression. Kind of like how games such as Witcher 3 or Fallout 4, where the main narrative asks you to do something really urgent and important, yet you spend years equivalent in game of perfecting your Gwent deck and other similar activities. So this is kind of like a response to that, which sounds pretty interesting. Now, another aspect over here shown was the open world design, which also looked pretty straightforward. The 14th century setting is definitely pulling a lot of weight over here. The fictional country heavily inspired by Eastern European folklore, and the general vibe definitely made for the lack of graphical polish, at least in this current pre-beta. Not that graphics are important in games, but I think that some proper modern rendering techniques are definitely needed over here. Better environmental shadows, reflections and whatnot. This game could look phenomenal, as the sense of scale and wonder definitely seems to be there. They also mentioned exploration will play a huge role over here, with many enemy patrols, vampire blood transports, and even ancient ruins amongst some of the distractions we're going to find out over there. Even showing a group of bandits trying to mug Cohen on the side of the road as he was making his way over to one of the main cities. And they've actually shown one of them, which was Wartraw, one of the larger towns in the game, featuring multiple different districts, including this richer districts in which the action takes place. One thing that they mentioned is that how free you are to move inside of these cities depends a lot how much of damage the vampire forces prior to this. So if you lay low, the guards over here won't really bother you, but things can definitely change if you really start making a dent into Brance's forces. Crowds didn't seem too wild, nor did the AI, but the overview made it seem quite a lot of these scenes playing out with all of the NPCs and townsfolk over there may lead to important quests that we can choose to interact with or even completely ignore. And it's not just humans and vampires living in these lands, other creatures made their way as well, again inspired from Eastern European folklore. Which brings us to the combat gameplay, and again, this being a pre-beta obviously shows that a lot of these animations need a lot more refining, especially with smoother transition from enemy to enemy, but also some better camera work. However, the foundation seems to be solid, and what's interesting is the dual approach to Cohen's powers. During the day, he's pretty much going to be in his human form, and during the night, he gets all of those really cool vampire abilities. During the day, you mainly use the sword in conjunction with hexes and other lesser abilities like pocket sand over here, whereas during the night is when the cool stuff happens. You get shadow stepping from rooftop to rooftop, walking up and gliding down walls, the vampire claws and the vampire feeding, all of which definitely play really well into that fantasy. The highlight here is that melee fighting uses what's essentially directional combat, both for sword and for the vampire claw attacks. So if you played games like For Honor or more recently Kingdom Come 2, it's pretty much attacking enemies from the left, right, up or down, and equally also defending yourself from any of these directions depending on the enemy attack input. The difference obviously being here that the claws are quicker and they also hit stronger, but your enemies, the ones that you fight during the nighttime when you have these powers, are also more challenging, so obviously it comes into play. Good to note, however, you're not locked into using just powers like the claws as a vampire, you can still go back to the sword as well. Another aspect is that through different skill trees, you have access to both passive and active abilities as well as upgrades for them. It's actually pretty straightforward here if you ask me. We have the 3 perk trees for the human, vampire, and the shared passives that also work for both the human and the vampire form. Then we've also seen that some of the human perks over here showed passives with several tiers of progression each, with some of the main ones further providing extra bonuses. Like for example, Arcane Binding also giving 20% chance to deal extra damage with hexes besides that duration increase. Plus a 4th tree specifically for active abilities that we can unlock as we level up, and some of which we've already seen in the form of hexes and other similar abilities. So besides the pocket sand that we use to stun targets, another one shown was Burning Blood that literally boils the enemy's skin and blood, dealing damage over time, or the Artery attack with a 100% chance of leaving your target instantly headless. Enemy reactivity is important in a game like this, and looking at the physics involved here, it seems that that part is nailed down in Dawnwalker, so the combat definitely seems to have quite a bit of impact to it. One thing I will mention though is abilities right now seem to stop the time completely when scrolling through the ability wheel, and as others also pointed out, this can feel a bit immersion breaking, so I think I can also agree to the same conclusion that a slowdown time would be much more preferred in this situation. This can potentially open up other strategy elements as well, such as paying attention to where the enemies will move or attack from next, but at the very least, it's not going to be quite as jarring to go to a complete stop. However, the vampire gameplay definitely seems to be where the game is at. This shows the world from a completely different perspective, reaching places that normally are not possible during the day. And I really like the feeding mechanic over here. As a vampire, you need to drink blood to stay alive, but it seems there are choices over here too. So you can feed on humans, on small animals, but other creatures as well. However, you can also choose how much you feed on them. For example, you can feed only a little bit up until the victim remains unconscious or completely drain the life out of them. And this may have stronger repercussions later down the line. One of the examples given over here mentioned accidentally draining somebody that may have been a quest giver or an important character in the narrative later down the line. But other abilities also included the shadow step we talked about before, the main way to instantly jump to higher up places normally out of Cohen's reach. Also the plane shift, which pretty much lets you walk up vertically on walls and even on ceilings. The claws obviously being one of the main attractions over here, kinda changing from the sword gameplay, but that's still something that you can do even in this form. And of course the focus modes with keener senses, more can be revealed in the open world, including hidden places with loots and even secret quests, which all came into play against Xanthi, the boss fight over here. And I'm not gonna lie, it seemed interesting. However, some of the blood whips over here definitely looked a bit like getting slapped with wet noodles, so hopefully more impact is added to them in the future. However, her ability to make you literally explode to bits was really freaking cool and something you have to interrupt ASAP if you want to survive in this boss fight. Also, it seems there's a blood barrier preventing damage, but a lot of this seems to be something that's based on your skill level and just paying attention, so it seems like a fair fight even though it is difficult. They did mention that it is possible to take down the boss right now, albeit it's very difficult, so I can definitely see folks out there trying to speedrun and or completing the game with minimal progression. But overall, it looks like the fight is all about paying attention to what she does and reacting in time to deactivate her abilities. Now, on a final note, we also have to talk about loot and progression. Like I just showed you before, the loot looks quite straightforward. Occasionally, some of the UI even looks very Witcher 3 inspired. And, you know, after so many RPGs, pretty much all of these loot systems look exactly the same to me. But we've got color-coded gear with increasingly better stats to incentivize the gear chase. A lot of this also drops from enemies you defeat, but also it seems that we have many secrets to discover to make exploration worth it and may even be a decisive factor into becoming stronger before we actually tackle the main narrative. But overall, the foundation seems to be solid. They do have at least one more year of work ahead of them, so fingers crossed that we actually get a proper third-person vampire game with a dark fantasy setting, because I've been waiting for one for a very long time, because, you know, we aren't getting anything else in the meantime. But this is pretty much it. Let me know what you think about the video and the game in the comments below, and I will see you guys in the next one.